In the acclaimed miniseries Band of Brothers, the story of Private Albert Blythe is presented as one of the great tragedies of Easy Company. We first meet him as a young paratrooper overwhelmed by the chaos of combat in Normandy. His arc is defined by a haunting case of shell shock or battle fatigue, where he is temporarily struck blind by the psychological trauma of war. He is a symbol of the fragile human spirit caught in the unforgiving machinery of conflict. The series portrays Blythe as a soldier struggling to overcome his fear. Encouraged by Major Dick Winters, he takes part in a dangerous patrol and even scores a kill, seemingly conquering his inner demons. However, his journey is cut short when he is shot by a sniper during the Battle of Carentan. This wound becomes the focal point of his on-screen fate, a physical manifestation of the war's inescapable toll. The final somber note on his character is delivered through on-screen text at the end of the third episode. It states that Albert Blythe never recovered from the wounds he received in Normandy and died in 1948. For millions of viewers, this was the definitive, heartbreaking end to his story, a young life broken and ultimately claimed by the war. This narrative, however, is a myth. To understand the real man, we must go back to the beginning, long before he became a character on a screen. Albert Blythe was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in 1923. Like many young men of his generation, he grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression and came of age as the world plunged into war. He answered the call to service, choosing one of the most demanding and dangerous paths available to a soldier. Instead of joining the regular infantry, Blythe volunteered for the paratroopers, a new and elite branch of the U.S. Army. He successfully endured the brutal training regimen at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, earning his jump wings and a place in Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. He was no different from the men who would become legends alongside him: Winters, Garner, Lipton, and Luz. He was a Toccoa man, forged in the same fire. When he jumped into Normandy on D-Day, he was not a symbol of fragility but a highly trained airborne soldier, part of the vanguard of the Allied invasion. He was prepared to fight and, if necessary, to die for the liberation of Europe. The real Albert Blythe was not a character defined by fear, but a volunteer who chose to be at the forefront of the greatest conflict in human history. The event that defines Blythe's story, both in the series and in reality, is the intense fighting for the French town of Carentan. This was a crucial objective for the Allies, a strategic crossroads needed to link the forces landing at Utah and Omaha beaches. The battle was a brutal house-to-house grind against determined German defenders, and it was here that Blythe faced his ultimate test. During a reconnaissance patrol on the outskirts of the town, Blythe's unit came under fire from a German sniper. In the ensuing chaos, a single bullet found its mark, striking Blythe in the right shoulder. The wound was serious, taking him out of the fight and marking the end of his combat service in Normandy. This part of the story, the fact that he was wounded in action, is entirely true. However, it is how the series frames this event that the myth begins. It is presented as the final blow to a soldier already broken by the psychological trauma of war. The sniper's bullet is not just a wound to the body, but the fatal injury to a spirit that, according to the on-screen narrative, would never heal. In reality, this moment was not an end, but the beginning of a long and unexpected journey. The conclusion of Albert Blythe's story in Band of Brothers is delivered with the stark finality of a historical footnote. The on-screen text reads, "Albert Blythe never recovered from the wounds he received in Normandy. He died in 1948 and was buried in Philadelphia." For over a decade, this was accepted as fact by millions of viewers and even by many historical enthusiasts. It was a poignant, tragic ending that seemed to fit the narrative of a soldier consumed by war. This single sentence cemented Blythe's legacy as a casualty of battle fatigue, a young man who survived the initial conflict only to succumb to its lingering effects years later. It painted a picture of a life cut short, a future stolen by a single sniper's bullet, and the invisible wounds of combat. The story was powerful, emotional, and resonated deeply with audiences. But it was completely wrong. The real Albert Blithe did not die in 1948. He did not spend his final years languishing from his injuries. The tidy, tragic narrative presented on screen, while emotionally effective, obscured a far more remarkable and inspiring truth about his resilience, his courage, and his unwavering dedication to service. After being wounded at Corentin in June 1944, the real Albert Blithe was evacuated from the front lines, beginning a long and arduous path to recovery. He was transported to a hospital in England where he received medical care for the gunshot wound to his shoulder. He, along with thousands of other wounded Allied soldiers, spent months recuperating far from the battlefield. Contrary to the show's narrative, his wound, while serious, was not a life sentence. He recovered his physical health and, on October 1, 1945, after the war in Europe had ended, he was honorably discharged from the Army. He returned home to the United States not as a broken man destined for an early grave, but as a decorated veteran of the Normandy campaign. This fact alone completely rewrites the character we see on screen. Blithe was not a man who never recovered. He was a soldier who was wounded, treated, and who successfully completed his term of service. His story could have ended there as a respected veteran who did his part and returned to civilian life. But his commitment to service was far from over. The man who returned to Philadelphia was not the same boy who had left. He had seen the horrors of war firsthand and had borne its scars. For many, this would have been the end of their military journey. But for Albert Blithe, the call to serve was a defining part of his identity. After a brief period as a civilian, he made a decision that directly contradicts the on-screen portrayal of him as a victim of war. He re-enlisted in the U.S. Army. This was not the action of a man broken by battle fatigue or slowly dying from old wounds. It was the choice of a professional soldier, a man who found purpose and meaning in military life. He once again took the oath to defend his country, embarking on a new chapter of a military career that most viewers of Band of Brothers never knew existed. This decision speaks volumes about his true character. It demonstrates a level of resilience and dedication that the miniseries, in its tragic portrayal, completely missed. Albert Blithe was not a man defined by his trauma. He was a man defined by his enduring commitment to duty and service. Blithe's second chapter of service took him to another brutal conflict on the other side of the world, the Korean War. When hostilities broke out in 1950, Blithe, now a seasoned veteran, was deployed to the Korean Peninsula. There, he once again faced the perils of combat, fighting in a war often remembered as the Forgotten War. During his time in Korea, his leadership and experience proved invaluable. He rose through the non-commissioned officer ranks, eventually achieving the rank of Master Sergeant. This is a position of significant responsibility, reserved for soldiers who demonstrate exceptional skill, leadership, and dedication. He was not just a soldier. He was a leader of soldiers entrusted with their training, discipline, and well-being in a combat zone. His service in Korea was distinguished and honorable. He was awarded numerous commendations for his actions, further cementing his legacy as a dedicated career soldier. The young, frightened private portrayed on screen is a world away from the reality of Master Sergeant Albert Blithe, a decorated combat veteran of two major American wars. After the Korean War, Albert Blithe's military career continued. He remained in the Army, taking on various assignments and postings. His final chapter of service saw him stationed in West Germany. During the height of the Cold War, he was part of the American forces standing as a bulwark against the Soviet Union, a testament to a life spent on the front lines of global conflict. In December 1967, while attending an event in Germany, Master Sergeant Blithe began to feel unwell. He was taken to a hospital where he was diagnosed with a perforated ulcer. Despite undergoing surgery, complications arose, and on December 17, 1967, 19 years after the series claimed he had died, Albert Blithe passed away at the age of 44. His death was not the result of his World War II wound. It was a tragic but natural medical event that occurred while he was still on active duty serving his country. In recognition of his long and distinguished career, he was brought home and laid to rest with full military honors in one of America's most sacred places, Arlington National Cemetery. So, why did a production as meticulously researched as Band of Brothers get such a fundamental fact so wrong? The error was not born of malice or sloppy filmmaking, but rather from the fog of history. The primary source for the series was the book of the same name by historian Stephen Ambrose, who had conducted extensive interviews with the surviving veterans of Easy Company. The incorrect information about Blithe's death likely came from the memories of his fellow soldiers. Having lost touch with him after he was wounded, they may have heard an inaccurate report of his death and over the decades accepted it as fact. In an era before the internet and easily accessible digital records, verifying the post-war life of every single soldier was a monumental task. Ambrose included the 1948 death date in his book, and the series creators, relying on his acclaimed work, carried the error into their script. At the time of production, Blithe had no immediate family members who were aware of the project and could step forward to correct the record. It was a simple mistake, born of incomplete information, that inadvertently created a myth and obscured the true story of a remarkable soldier. The discovery of Albert Blithe's real story does not diminish the power of Band of Brothers. It enriches it. It replaces a tale of tragedy with one of inspiring resilience. The real Blithe was not a symbol of how war can break a man, but a testament to how a man can endure, recover, and continue to serve with honor and distinction for a lifetime. His final resting place at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 31, Site 4734, stands as a permanent tribute to his true legacy. He is buried among the nation's most revered heroes, a career soldier who served with distinction in World War II, the Korean War, and the Cold War. He was a husband and a father, a master sergeant who led men, and a patriot who dedicated his life to his country. The story of Albert Blithe reminds us that history is a living, breathing thing, always open to revision as new truths come to light. The fictional character taught us about the costs of war, but the real man teaches us a more profound lesson about the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome, to persevere, and to continue to answer the call of duty.